All right, so today we're diving into the opening themes of Sepia and the ways trust and betrayal shape its characters and story arcs. The story gives us this fascinating blend of personal struggles and mythological intrigue. Anna, you know this material inside out from playing Ellie. What stood out to you most, especially about how the short screenplay came together?
Honestly, the short screenplay is like, oh gosh, it's lightning in a bottle. It delivers so much in just 5 minutes. I think it's all about setting the tone, right? It introduces you to this web of relationships Ellie, Bernie, and that camera. And boom, it hits you with these really raw emotions.
Absolutely. It feels so distilled, like every line, every moment serves a purpose. And it begins with Mrs. Tyndall, recounting this myth about Hera and Zeus. Talk about clever setup. What's your take, Anna? How does that tie into Ellie's journey?
Oh, Mrs. Tyndall's myth about Hera is so vital. It's not just the storytelling, but it actually foreshadows all these patterns of jealousy, deception, and heartbreak. Hera's jealousy over Zeus's infidelities. It echoes Ellie's own fears about trust and betrayal, grounded in her father's behavior. And Mrs. Tyndall? She's like this steady anchor, except she's kind of haunted by it too, with Stacy later in the story.
That's a great point. And speaking of Ellie, her history, you mentioned her father's infidelity shaping her. How does that past trauma affect her present?
So much, like she doesn't even really get what trust is supposed to look like, you know? Her dad's betrayal. Ugh, it's like this slow poison. You can feel all those raw emotions bubbling up when she looks at Bernie and starts questioning if he's any different. And it's heartbreaking. There's this fragility to her hope in the relationship.
Totally. It just layers her character with this vulnerability. And then, bam, that photograph. Let's talk about it. The emotional nuclear moment. It wasn't just betrayal, it was the destruction of trust, and everything tied to it. Social issues of trust, too, right?
Exactly. Like, it's not really the act itself, it's the not knowing what's real anymore. Once Bernie sees that photo, it doesn't matter what Ellie says. Trust is gone. And let's be honest, that hits differently even outside the story. I mean, relationships break down over perceived betrayal all the time. That camera makes it feel so final.
That aspect speaks to everyone. No matter how much we'd like to think otherwise, trust is fragile. Break it, and it's like dropping a vase. Even if you glue it back together, the cracks are always visible. And the story doesn't shy away from showing just how damaging that can be for both of them.
Totally. The fallout shapes their arcs, their relationships going forward. It's so heavy and beautiful. This story is like the perfect mirror for how we deal with trust in our own lives, you know?
We've unpacked so much about trust and relationships, but let's drill deeper into the emotional heart of this story. That photograph, that moment, and really the camera. Anna, how about Fuok and his connection to what becomes known as Hera's camera? It's a device with so much weight beyond its lens, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. Fwok, he starts out almost magical, you know, like this keeper of all these stories and treasures. But when Bernie meets him, you don't just see a collector. You see a man who's, well, broken. It's so subtle how they crafted his backstory, but you immediately feel that something tragic has wiped out his happiness, and the camera explains it. He's relieved to get rid of it as if it weighs on his soul.
Interesting. That's one of those visual cues in storytelling. Fuok's demeanor tells you everything you need to contrast his past with his present, right? How did you feel about the reimagining of mythology through Hera's influence on the camera?
Oh, it's just brilliant. Hera is portrayed in such a gripping way, like this embodiment of raw emotions, jealousy, rage, and longing for justice. The mythological roots make the camera feel alive, like it's her lingering spirit or intent, and Bernie unknowingly steps right into it. Hera's vengeance wasn't just for Zeus, it extended to everything he touched, all his mistresses. Now, Bernie's holding an artifact steeped in that legacy of mistrust. It's chilling, but perfect.
It transforms from an antique object to almost an emotional weapon. Speaking of which, that weapon, the camera, it destroys Bernie and Ellie's relationship. The pictures destroyed trust, but the mythology makes every doubt feel so personal. How do you see Bernie evolving or devolving because of the camera?
Oh, Bernie becomes this totally different person, someone consumed by paranoia and possession. The way he looks at Ellie changes after the betrayal, or what he thinks is betrayal. And it all comes from the camera. Like, this one artifact amplifies every shadowy suspicion in his mind. And Ellie? Oh, poor Ellie. She loves him so profoundly, but her love isn't enough to heal what they're both going through.
Exactly. It's like they didn't just lose trust in one another, they lost pieces of themselves. And let's not forget Stacy. Anna, what's Stacy's role in shedding more light on what the camera is capable of?
Stacy is so pivotal in that sense. She explains what Bernie couldn't figure out himself. The moment Bernie learns from her about the camera, and this is fascinating, it's about perception. When you find out it doesn't just reveal truth, it reflects emotions, desires, and worst fears. It somehow makes the story even heavier. Like, what truths does anyone really want to see? Did Ellie even know her subconscious was part of this? And Stacy's connection to Mrs. Tyndall, Bernie's humanity in helping Mrs. Tyndall, it feels like destiny aligning them, you know?
It does feel like synchronicity, and it raises questions about who the right people are for whom. If Ellie hadn't been the one for Bernie, and we later learned she was, Stacy might have been a natural fit. But Hera's camera ensures that truth, the rawest form of it, always comes to light, whether it's comforting or devastating.
Totally. And there's so much tension between wanting the truth and fearing it. The characters are all caught juggling those feelings. Ellie, Bernie, Stacy, they're all constantly trying to balance their truths with their actions. And the camera, it's just there, turning up the volume on everything. It's so devastating, but you can't look away.
We've explored the intricate dance between truth, perception, and relationships that Hera's camera exposed. But now let's shift to perhaps the most poignant moment of the story, the impact of Ellie's letter. It's a scene that's raw and vulnerable, where Ellie lays everything bare, giving Bernie closure while shattering the audience. Anna, your delivery of those lines captured so much emotion. What was it like to give voice to such a powerful confession?
Oh, it was gut-wrenching, Eric. Like, from the moment I read those lines, I am with someone who loves me deeply, and he didn't need a camera to know if I loved him back. I just I felt everything breaking apart for Ellie. It wasn't just acting, it was living that heartbreak and knowing she was letting Bernie go because deep down she blamed herself for everything. It's her way of saying, I'll absorb this pain so you can move forward. And that's just, wow.
It's a deeply human moment, isn't it? Ellie's ability to recognize her role in their fractured relationship, then selflessly wish Bernie happiness. It's a level of grace not everyone could achieve. Do you think Ellie would truly be happy knowing Bernie found Stacy?
Honestly, I think she would. Like, it'd hurt, but she'd be happy. Because loving someone sometimes means letting them heal without you. She already feels like she destroyed Bernie's ability to trust. Knowing Stacy helped him piece things together would bring her some peace, even if it also hurts like crazy.
That's an incredibly empathetic insight. And Bernie's journey, it's almost mirroring Ellie's in a way, only it's Stacy who gets him to this place of clarity. But we have to address Bernie's internal struggles too. Anna, why do you think Bernie felt so drawn to defending a stranger's relationship near the end?
Oh man, that's the most powerful part for me. Bernie. I think he saw himself in that moment, a piece of him clinging to an ideal that he had already destroyed in his life. Defending them was his way of atoning. But when he realizes he was no better, oh, the guilt, it just shatters Bernie. I think that's when he realizes he can't run anymore. He has to stop blaming everyone else and rebuild himself piece by piece.
And it's in those broken pieces that he eventually finds resiliency, right? Through Stacy's compassion and honesty, Bernie starts to heal, to accept that love doesn't have to be perfect to be worth fighting for. This brings us full circle to Dr. Rezo and the theme of finding strength in understanding oneself. How do you think this theme resonates universally for audiences?
Oh, it's everything. Like, no one escapes heartbreak or betrayal unscarred, right? But it's a universal journey, the ache, the forgiveness, the rebuilding. This story shows us it's okay to be messy, to hurt, to rebuild slowly, as long as you don't give up on love altogether. And Stacy's gentleness, Bernie's effort, even Ellie's acceptance, they remind us that love can survive even when it's redefined.
Beautifully said, Anna. Sepia doesn't promise a perfect conclusion, but it gives us something better: hope. Hope that even in the sepia tinted shadows of our past, we can find clarity, honesty, and eventually redemption. And I think that's a message worth celebrating.
Definitely. It's like closure doesn't mean an ending, it means you get to start again, stronger and wiser. And that's honestly what makes Sepia so moving. It doesn't shy away from the toughest emotions, but it gives you the tools to face them head on.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our journey through Sepia. Anna, your take on Ellie and the whole story. Gosh, it's been truly inspiring. Thank you for sharing so much with us today. Any final thoughts for the listeners?
Just don't be afraid of your sepia moments, They're part of you and they're worth embracing. And if you haven't seen Sepia yet, what are you even doing? Go watch it, seriously.
Perfectly said. Thank you, Anna, and thanks to all of you tuning in. Until next time, take care and remember, it's okay to trust again.
So let's start with this image. A dark tunnel, it's cramped, shadowy, and there's this tiny circle of light ahead pulling you in. That voice whispers, almost accusing, Why are we still so afraid of death? Then bam, a gunshot just rips across the scene. Did you feel that too? You're jerked into this blistering speed as if the tunnel throws you straight into someone's eye. It's disorienting, terrifying, truthful.
What a way to hook us, right? That opening scene plays on such a primal fear, death itself. It reflects an existential dread that's universal but deeply personal. Anna, don't you think that voice feels like the narrator is prying open something we avoid thinking about?
Totally, Eric. It's like a gut punch. Death is suddenly in your face, not this abstract idea, but something piercing, unavoidable. And it pushes us, the audience, to sit with it, just for a moment, before hurling us back into, oh man, the chaos of life. Like that grocery store scene, bodies shaking, hostages weeping, a phone ringing somewhere, and panic rising as two men with guns lose control. The violence is sudden and messy.
Exactly. And it captures how fragile a sense of normalcy can be. Psychologically, in moments like these, all defenses are stripped away. People's vulnerabilities become exposed, both the victims and even the attackers. It makes us wonder how fear drives human instinct, shaping our actions in extreme situations.
Yeah. And after that explosive moment, the story pivots to Matt Simon. He's this guy stuck in the aftermath of guilt, memories that hit him like that bullet, fast and lingering. The way he looks after Saran, ugh, it's heartbreaking. Even when his world is falling apart, there's so much warmth in how he tries to shield her. Their bond kind of becomes this fragile light in his darkness.
And, from a psychological lens, it's fascinating. Matt's trying, but he's totally weighed down by unresolved emotions. It's guilt, sure, but also grief. And people often cling to family, even imperfectly, as a grounding force when they're spiraling internally. In a sense, Siran represents Matt trying to hold on to his humanity amidst all that chaos.
It's raw, right? It makes you feel like, even in the darkest places, those curtains of doom, there's still this thread of connection holding characters together. And Matt, even if he's struggling, he's trying not to let it all slip away. So, after all that, we're drawn to Meyerton, this desolate, eerie house that seems to embody everything we just talked about. It's like stepping into a living memory of pain and fractures. Even from the outside, there's this heaviness, like it carries the weight of every suppressed scream, every sob we pretend to forget. And once you step in, it's palpable. It clings to you, reminding you of everything that breaks but doesn't vanish.
Exactly, Anna. Meyerton isn't just a setting. It almost becomes its own character, holding weight in every scene. It's like the walls themselves are etched with memories, painful ones. It's no surprise that places like these, historically tied to violence, often symbolize unresolved traumas that bleed into those who enter. Doesn't it feel like Meyerton actively pushes its history onto anyone nearby?
Oh, absolutely. The history here, it's deep. Like this isn't just a haunted house, it's a legacy of hurt. There were those incidents with the kids trapped in the fire, the babysitter with his sordid past, and even later, cases of assault freaking perpetuated here. It's like every violent act is stitched into the place, refusing to be forgotten. And then you have Matt and Siran entering this.
Fragile yet stormy backdrop.
Exactly. And Matt, oh my gosh, poor Matt, is trying to protect Siran while keeping himself together, all while Meyerton seems to taunt him at every turn. It's tragic because Siran is the spark of innocence, right? But here she is trying to create and heal in a place that's anything but safe.
Right? And trauma victims often seek control through some outlet. For Kiran, creativity fills that role. It's how she processes her pain. Derek's influence on her art is striking. He fosters this nurturing space where she can freely explore those emotions. It's cathartic and gentle amidst all the chaos. Without him, I wonder if she'd be able to keep that thread of hope intact.
Totally. Derek is like this quiet anchor, guiding Siren without dampening her voice. When she's sketching or just talking through her pain, you see her start to reclaim what Meyerton tries so hard to bury. The trust between them is just so moving. He gives her the lens to see her experience, not as just suffering, but as something she can transform into art.
And that connection is powerful. Derek's own sense of loss makes his mentoring even more poignant. It's as if by helping Siran navigate her trauma, he's also finding pieces of himself. It's not just redemption, it's this profound human reciprocity, healing through shared understanding, you know?
Oh, for sure. Meyerton may try to overshadow them, but through Derek and Siren's bond, they kind of carve out their own defiant narrative within its walls. And that's what makes Meyerton fascinating, not just as a physical place, but as a stage for this interplay of fear, resilience, and artistic triumph. And speaking of Saran's fierce spirit, there's this moment during her public interview that just crushes me every time. She takes everything Meyerton tried to drown her in, fear, grief, even doubt, and she channels it into something extraordinary. On camera, despite being frail and exhausted, she's utterly magnetic. She talks about life, loss, and hope with this raw intensity, like she's transforming every ounce of her pain into something massive. It's like witnessing art come alive in real time, you know?
Oh, definitely. What stands out to me is how Kiran channels what could easily leave most people feeling empty, her illness and the inevitability of time, and she turns it to uplift others. Psychologically, that level of resilience is rare. It's a vulnerable yet inspiring thing to witness someone refuse to let pain silence them. Instead, they carve meaning from it. Tyran does that effortlessly.
Totally, Eric. She reminds me of those rare people who just embody grace under pressure. A beacon, really. And her words during that scene, they hit like thunderbolts, like when she looks at the audience and says, "Sex was meant to preserve life, not destroy it." And you can just feel how deeply she believes in the possibility of people doing better, being better. It's not preachy, it's urgent.
Right? And this idea, this plea for people to protect life, it ties so beautifully into the recurring cycles of death and renewal in the story. Derek and Siren especially offer such a compelling contrast to Meyerton's long shadow. It's like they're saying to the house, to the world, we will not become part of your pain. Derek's role in particular stands out as a reminder of redemption and connection amidst tragedy.
I know, right? Derek's impact goes beyond words, like, he's not just a mentor or a protector to Siran. He's proof that even in spaces haunted by despair, you can carry light. Watching them together, you start to believe in that light yourself. And then there's that beautiful reunion scene later with the family and friends. It's so raw. Everyone's showing their pain, their love, their happiness. And oh man, it just floods the screen with emotion.
It's an emotional culmination that honestly feels so universal. Loss is inevitable, but transient reminds us it doesn't have to isolate. Instead, it can unite us through shared experiences like family coming closer or finding support from unexpected places. I mean, how many families watching this scene would feel their own struggles mirrored back to them?
Exactly. It's so satisfying because it isn't just about Suran, it's about everyone learning to let go. It's Matt evolving into someone more open, Aura grappling with that unspeakable loss, and even Johnson, remember that guy? Coming full circle and finding some kind of absolution. It's like this huge catharsis that doesn't end. It ripples outward.
Catharsis is the perfect word, Anna. And if I may, let's reflect for a second on this idea of renewal. Siren, through her courage and her art, leaves behind not just a tragedy, but an enduring legacy of compassion and awareness. Her heart-touching monologue in the public interview feels less like a goodbye and more like a what's next statement for those she left behind. It makes experiencing grief feel not like an ending, but a transition.
Which, hey, transient. That's exactly it. Transition. So, for my favorite part, are you ready for some behind the scenes magic?
Of course, lay it on us.
All right, did you know that in the original script, Siren had a twin? Aura. Now, Aura was written as this fiercely protective, rebellious force who sees Siran not just as family, but as the other half of her soul. It's wild because even though Siran physically departs, Aura learns to balance not having her nearby, carrying forward her essence. It's like the ultimate metaphor for transformation, right?
Fascinating. And twins add depth to the thematic balance of connection and separation. What else you got?
Oh, I've got plenty, Eric. Like, in the novel, which I really hope they expand into a series, fingers crossed. Matt and Johnson, who seem like total strangers in the movie, were actually best friends in the book. There's this colossal fallout when Matt lets Johnson down, and you're literally torn up over who was right. And get this, you know the murderer Ernie Corvasis? Turns out the ghosts in Meyerton tolerated him living there for years because they never saw him as the killer until his last victim, Alice Muldoon. It's so twisted.
These details add so much weight to the layers of the story. It's clear that the more you dig into the full scope of Transient, the more complexities you uncover. No wonder so many fans hope for a serialized adaptation.
Exactly. This story deserves room to breathe. Every layer, from the motifs of Meyerton's ghosts to the ensemble relationships, embodies the kind of intricacy fit for TV. And when it finally happens, you can bet both of us will be fangirling and analyzing every single moment.
No question there, Anna. So, to wrap up, here's something for our listeners. If Transient teaches us one thing, it's that even in moments of endings, there's beauty in what we leave behind. Love doesn't die, it transitions. And as this episode ends, let's carry that with us. Let's
Beautifully said. Thanks for sticking with us through this roller coaster of a story. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and remember, the light in the tunnel's always closer than you think.